So yesterday I was talking to the networking part, and the guy said, wait a minute, so we have an American coming to Europe to talk about a European regulation. I said, well, there's a reason for that. So here's why. Oh, by the way, you can interact throughout the entire presentation. I don't do formal presentations anymore. It becomes difficult sometimes. So this is why. So I have a whole bunch of jobs. I only sleep like 4 hours a night. I'm not even joking. Attorney in private practice. The most what I do is help military veterans get their disabilities and deal with navigating the VA system. I teach at 2 different universities, both master's and doctoral classes. I actually just finished a class up on Tuesday while I was here for cloud management, and I have two other ones going on right now. It's interesting, especially since one of the schools, most of my students are international students. And I also work for a power company back home where I do both the controls and compliance. So this last guy was talking about the critical infrastructure. That's exactly what I do for them. I make sure they're compliant with the regulation that North America has called NERC-CIP, where I am in charge of identity access management, vulnerability management. Let's see what else is there. Identity access management, vulnerability management, ArcSight, Cisco security management, console, what else is there? Endpoint protection, group policies. I put all the enforcements in place and also make sure that everything is fine, turn over evidence to the federal government. And on top of all of that, I am the vice chairman of the Privacy and Data Privacy and Computer Crime Committee for the American Bar Association. What else do? I sit on a city government where I help plan how the city is going to be designed and grow. I do a lot of stuff. Publish. Trust me, I just call this my eye candy slide because it's like a whole bunch of stuff going on. It's way worse than it seems. So I do a lot. Published several times. I'm a chapter lead. The American Bar Association is coming out with a book called The International Guide to Cybersecurity. Chapter 5 is Enterprise Architecture Systems, and I'm the chapter lead for that one. I wrote half of that chapter myself, as well as wrote 2 or 3 parts of the compliance part for them as well. And I have a bunch of certifications. The GPN, who knows what the GPN is? No one, you know what the GPN is? I passed the certification the day before I flew over here. Seriously. I passed it Thursday, flew on Friday. All the rest of the stuff, whole bunch of degrees. It's truth. And what am I working on? Whole bunch of more stuff. I don't sleep. I really don't sleep. Working on 2 doctorates right now, working on some more certifications. I actually bought a brand new server just to take the OSCP. I can't wait to play with it. It has 4 10-core servers, 512 gigs of RAM. I can't wait to have fun with that server. It got here the day before I flew out here as well, so I couldn't play with it yet. And in my spare time, I watch horror movies, cook, and I try to grow food, but I can only grow flowers for some reason. So, question, who in here knows about GDPR already? Something about it. Perfect. We can skip through half of this presentation and get to the fun stuff then. Perfect. Let's skip through a bunch. Yep, don't need that part. Cover that. We'll get over this. Keep going. Keep going. Oh, by the way, I can make these slides available. I can email the conference and let them email everybody else, or you can email me for them. Skip. I forgot I put graphics in here. Can go over the structure. Don't need the structure anymore. I can go faster than this. This will be so much fun. The second half goes into all the fun stuff. This is more along the lines of structure still. If I could click faster, this would be... Why did I put all these graphics in here? This is taking so much time. Key components. Okay, so the reason why this is all in here is I actually did a presentation related to the same subject about 2 months ago in Florida. So they had to give them the whole background about all the stuff. So bear with me. We'll get to the fun part in a little bit. Keep going. We have 45 minutes, so I'll figure I would make better use of your time by getting to the fun stuff. I only got to that slide in Florida because we were talking the entire time in the hour conversation. Everybody knows about the fines. Recap issues. Number 2. Perfect. Now with the fun stuff. I think. Yes. GDPR and cloud technologies. So, I really don't remember doing all this. So, These are the three biggest cloud system providers globally in the world: Google, AWS, as well as Azure. Azure is kind of like the small puppy in the room. It's kind of like Mighty Mouse wanting to come in and take over everything. Interestingly enough, we're going to talk about Google again later because that's really funny. So Google has a directive out that states that they will assist you in making sure that you're GDPR compliant. Most of them, the way Google has their setup is, depending upon which one of their cloud services you have, it determines the percentage of control that they're taking responsibility for. Of course, all the cloud system providers are going to be called your data processors as far as GDPR is concerned. But every single one of them has a shared responsibility because you can't get rid of it. You can't get rid of your responsibility by making them the processor. Interestingly enough, you have the storage providers as well. This is where it gets kind of interesting because one thing that GDPR effectively requires is your data at rest to be encrypted. That's the shortest version of describing it. However, I can promise you, unless you put it encrypted on one of these service storage providers, it's not going to be encrypted. I can upload a Word document right now with reason why they have to encrypt the stuff. You have to do it yourself, which actually goes into a best practices I think we're going to talk about later. I put the slowest transitions in the world on here. Okay. Cloud concerns, data in transit. One thing that is effectively required by GDPR is that the data being transferred be encrypted. It gets even more interesting when you're going to cross borders, when you're going to transferring data across countries, across different borders. There was a slide on there that talked about that earlier, but there are some countries, for example, Sweden is one, Switzerland is one, the United States is one only by a small specific requirement are they able to explicitly transfer data. Other than that, you can't transfer data through other countries, which gets interesting when you start talking about all the different cloud service providers have servers that sit in other countries. You're transferring data. Most companies, even with myself, you have servers sitting in more than one place or more than one drive to back up your data. If you don't back up your data, you're running into a problem. Everyone knows good practice is to back up your data. Where's your server? One thing that GDPR suggests you to do is map out the data flow of your entire data to make sure you know where your data is transferring, what countries your data is going through. Data at rest. I think we got to talk about that. Okay, so one of the paper that I published a while back was talking about the encryption keys. My recommendation as a lawyer is always to control your own encryption keys. If the cloud service provider insists on them encrypting the data themselves for transmission, my advice is always then you encrypt it before you give it to them. Have 2 levels of encryption on it. Give them encrypted data. Let them transfer whatever they want to do, encrypt it. Maintain your own encryption keys. From a legal standpoint, here's the reason why. Say, for example, the government comes in and they say, you know what? We believe that data you have contains some kind of horrible things. Give us your data. Well, you may have a contract that says, well, I'm not going to give this data up unless you give me a legitimate reason why. Give me a search warrant. Case in point, Apple. Give me a search warrant and I still may ignore it. Well, the reason why you can get away with that is if you hold encryption keys, how are they going to get the data? They can't just go to, say, Google and say, give me this person's data if you hold the encryption keys, because they still have jumbled data anyway. So always keep your own encryption keys. It's extremely important. Now we get into GDPR and privacy. At its core, GDPR is not a privacy regulations. It's a regulation over data protection, but it effectively forces privacy. It's kind of like in the U.S. In the Constitution of the United States, there is not expressly said that a person has a right to privacy in the U.S. The courts interpret it to be privacy. That's similar to what GDPR has done. It doesn't explicitly say you're going to make sure that everybody gets their own privacy. It says you're going to make sure that privacy occurs. So it's a matter of interpretation. The difference between privacy itself and GDPR. So I guess the easy way of describing this is GDPR sits on top of privacy. It's like easiest way of describing this slide right here. Privacy, you're working to protect someone's data, protect someone's information from hackers, from leaks, even from internal threats. Interesting enough, a lot of people don't realize how much insider threats cause data leakage that happen constantly. A threat does not necessarily mean disgruntled or a malicious person within your company. It could be a person who just forgot to disconnect something and left it running. Insider threat is a real serious scenario and can cause a lot of problems when you're talking about a regulation that requires protection of data. For cloud, Google actually said that, I'm going to have so much fun with Google in a minute. Google actually said that their cloud services are ISO compliant, which basically says that, well, I'm not going to go over this part. Basically, it says that you will make sure you have a process in place to check the data, where the data is going, that there will not be any data leakage. Basically, a DLP program, which we'll cover on the next slide as well. Oh, actually, yeah, here we go. DLP. How many people know what data loss prevention is? Perfect. Have a next question. Who in here knows how to write scripts? Who in here knows how to write a script to query to look for other data? To query to look for other data. Same exact thing, basically. Just make it really simple when they get the software. If you're using the cloud service provider, you might want to check and see if they're ISO 27018 compliant, mostly because of data leakage. But again, if you're encrypting data before you transfer them, makes it a lot easier. GDPR doesn't exactly say that you have to have it sitting at rest and encrypted, but it gives the suggestion, the strong recommendation that that's what you do. It's kind of interesting when you think about it. It says we strongly suggest you do this. Anytime you see a strong suggestion in any regulation, basically it says do it. That's a short version of it. Just do it, because they're going to find a way to charge you for it anyway. I found this compliance matrix online, Cloud Assurance Alliance. Actually, I forgot, I'm actually on one of their work groups as well. My CCSK, which is in cloud security, came from them. They have a compliance matrix that's the exact name of it. It's called Cloud Compliance Matrix. It gives a list of all the different areas of technology that somebody should be concerned with. And if you go across the spreadsheet, I would have put up here, but it would have been really difficult to read. It has every single regulation that you could possibly think of, and tells you exactly where it falls into that area. For every regulation, from NERC to GDPR, for example, it tells you exactly where those areas fall. It was last updated November the 12th of 2018, if I remember correctly. If you all can, please download this thing. It makes life so much simpler for you. Trust me. It tells you where to go to find the areas that you're going to fall into a regulatory problem with. Next part. Yay! Concerns in future. So right now, everybody is doing a lot of Internet of Things. I'll put myself out there. Who other than me has cameras on their house? We're going to have some real fun with that in a little bit. Somebody actually got fined for that. We'll talk about that in the coming up slide. Internet of Things, everything's connected now. I'm very particular about having a bunch of holes poked into my network just to let devices get out. You have Nest cameras. You can control your thermostats of your house from your cell phone. I even found a stove that you can control through Wi-Fi. Why on earth would anyone cook with a stove you can control through Wi-Fi? That's just asking for danger. And it was a gas stove too. That just makes no sense to me. But everything is starting to get connected. All these devices are connecting with each other. The stove is talking to your refrigerator, who's then talking to your cell phone, who's then talking to your thermometer. In a little while, the dog's going to have a collar to tell it when to use the bathroom. It's going to be crazy. But that's what society is coming to. Social media is talked about in GDPR. It's becoming an extremely gray area because a lot of people use single sign-on authentication to get on their services. Basically, they set up a profile. I typically run through this when you apply for jobs or put your resume on stuff. They say, hey, you want to use our service? Do you have Facebook? Absolutely, all the time. Do you have Facebook? Oh, do you have Google? Wonderful. You don't have to sign up with us. Just hit authorize and we'll take all your data from you. That's becoming a really big gray area because now you have data being passed through areas that you don't control. So, all right, put this down for a second. Insurance. This was a big question that came up 2 months ago in Florida. Someone inquired about how insurance companies will address GDPR. The shortest answer I can give is the one that all lawyers give. It depends. So the reason why it depends is this: your insurance may not be strong enough to cover a fine from GDPR. It also depends on how they're going to classify the insurance. So, for example, I personally have a personal liability umbrella over me for $1 million. If I go out and hit somebody, I have $1 million insurance coverage just for me by myself, outside of even my vehicle's insurance. That's just me personally. Not everybody has policy limits that are high enough to cover them for whatever they do. So, like when I go out of town and I rent a car, they say, you want the insurance for what? I have $1 million umbrella policy. If I wreck this $30,000 car, pretty certain my $1 million umbrella policy is going to cover it. Now, when you get into fines north of $10 to $20 million, it may not be that wise to have just a general liability policy, because insurance companies are really good about modifying how they classify your claim to determine whether they will or will not pay you whenever you file a claim. Insurance companies, oh, and by the way, general cybersecurity insurance by itself does not, generally speaking, cover GDPR issues. Now, it may if you have a policy set up enough for a data breach, and the reason for it is data breaches. However, we're going to the slide where certain things fines were put on people because of what they did versus, how can I put this? There were fines that were imposed on companies because what they did versus what occurred. It may not be that they did not give the 72-hour breach notification that's required by GDPR. That may not be the problem. It may not be the data breach at all. It may be that they decided not to disclose all of their documentation to the investigators when they came in to investigate about GDPR. That at best would probably be general liability, but you're going to get into an issue when you get into negligence as well, which I actually did some research in as far as how other countries deal with their liability issues. And European court is really interesting. So the breach must be significantly serious. There's a rule of law that says the infringement had to intend to confer rights to individuals. And there must be a direct causal link between the breach of the obligation resting on the states and the damage sustained by the injury parties. Does anybody have any idea what that means? No? U.S. makes it super simple. Basically, in the U.S. system, it's called negligence. Duty, breach, causation, damages. Effectively the exact same thing as, I actually literally copied this from the European court's directive and just modified it a tad bit. So I don't have to worry about plagiarism issues. U.S. system has what's called duty, breach, causation, damages. Duty. Does a person owe a duty to someone? So I'm going to take you because you're sitting right here. If you come to me for legal service, do I have a duty to do anything to you? Answer would probably be yes. I took on your case. Was there a breach of anything, a breach of confidentiality, a breach of fiduciary duty, some kind of a breach? Doesn't mean data breach, it's a breach of a duty to do something. Was there a breach to that duty? If there was, then we get into the causation and the damages part. Did you suffer? It's interesting we actually put causations before damages because you can't really have damages. You can't have causation without damages. It's kind of weird. You have to have all four elements. So did you suffer a damage from my duty? If, let's say you contracted me to do a penetration test. Okay, better than legal. Legal gets really interesting. I can get out of legal a little bit easier than penetration tests. You say you contracted me to do a penetration test. I have a duty to penetrate test your company. You tell me, you know what? Whatever you do, do not go into these credit cards. This database that has credit cards and PI information in it. Well, I just randomly started scanning and breaking into everything I could find. Oops, now I have your credit card data. Okay. Did you suffer a damage from that? Pretty sure that PCI is going to fine you for that, which then caused damages. It's kind of interesting they put in that order, I guess, because it's easier to remember duty, breach, causation, damages when you can't have damages without having causation and vice versa. Swiss legal system. This one was really interesting. There is an Article 102, Section 1 of the SEC, which talks specifically about offenses against property. Articles 137 through 172 talks about corporate liability. corporations can be fined criminally liable, not just civilly liable, for what they do with the data or anything related to their companies. They can be, let's say, both criminally and civilly liable for what they do. The fun part comes in the actual harm or potential harm. Most courts have been reluctant to allow people, regular citizens, to sue companies because of data breaches. So I have a credit card. Yeah, we'll give a big one. Equifax had a data breach. Equifax also pays out X number of money in class action lawsuits and settles. Rather than finding it, most of that, by the way, is not because they were found negligent. Most of the time they do class action lawsuits and settle because it's not worth the publicity issues that are going to come from it. That's basically why everyone settles a class action suit, because there has yet to be a successful identity theft lawsuit against a company because of their data breach. It just hasn't happened yet. I personally am trying to make that happen. I want to be the first one to do it. I think it'd be pretty awesome. Hopefully I can do it before I get really, really old and have more gray hair. So this is where it gets fun. What is property? The courts are starting to take an approach that your personal data, everything related to you in general, is your own property. In the U.S. system, in torts, you have something called liable defamation. You also have using someone's likeness. So if you hear someone, I just random things. So we have a celebrity who all of a sudden finds out that some promoter used their name or their picture on their flyer to advertise people coming there and they did not authorize it. Well, that's their property. They can sue the person for that. But so this concept is starting to move over into the security world when it comes to people's rights. It's slowly starting to migrate over that way, which eventually is going to get us to the fun part. But fines outside the EU. There are ways within the legal system between different countries to impose a fine and force someone to pay money. Including this 50 million euros we're about to talk about in a second. So a lot of times people think, well, you know what? My headquarters is not in there, it's not in the EU. I don't have to worry about it. What are they going to do to me? They gave a fine. So what? Well, do you have any property over there? Are you interacting with other states? With other countries? A country can pull you there if they want to, especially if it's criminal. If they decide to charge you with criminal charges, they can pull you into their country and then force you to pay money at that point. So it is definitely possible to have someone from, say, Europe find a company who has their headquarters in California and the fine be enforced. It's definitely 100% possible. As we're going to get into on these fun examples. So this is why I asked you about the cameras earlier. There was a guy in Austria who is an entrepreneur. He had some kind of a betting company. He put a camera outside of his business covering the interests of his business. The camera was situated in such a way that it covered part of the sidewalk as well. They fined him for violating GDPR, for having a camera outside his house. So it's not necessarily just the data you have, it's what you collect, which is why I brought the property part up before. It's not just whether you collect someone's name, email address, what they do for a living. It's their picture as well. It's them. That was a very interesting find. Failure to secure person's data and suffered a breach. Okay, kudos. I guess you pronounced it noodles, maybe. They got fined. Portuguese got fined because 400,000 euros for failure to ensure confidentiality and failure to limit access, identity access management. Although it goes into the whole idea of security by design, which is what GDPR does require. It does have in there explicitly, you will have a security policy in place. You will have security built in by design. It doesn't tell you what you have to have, but it tells you would do it. Last one is good old Google. I had to talk about Google. I think it's kind of funny that Google got fined 50 million euros 2 months ago, but they're advertising their ability to comply with GDPR. That's ironic in my opinion. How do you find 50 million euros but you're advertising you can keep people complying with GDPR? Makes zero sense to me. This is where it gets fun. I personally believe asking relevant questions will help you get into a situation where you're not sure whether you're going to fall into an issue with GDPR. Ask relevant questions. Where are you from? What country do you live in? When I meet people, I ask them a question all the time. Say, hey, where do you live? Where are you from? They tell me I'm from this place. Oh, okay, wonderful. Simple questions. There's a big problem with the second part. Is the information relevant to task at hand? So there's a big, in my personal opinion, big problem there's a big problem within the retail system in the United States where you go to the store. I'm going to buy a phone charger at Best Buy. They're infamous for this. Go to buy a phone charger at Best Buy. You get to the register. The first thing they say is, may I have your email address to buy a phone charger? Why? Yes. Or correct. Or your zip code. They say, may I have your email? What's your zip code? It's like, why do you need my zip code? We want to know where our customers come from. Why is it relevant? This is when you get into issues with GDPR. Is the data you're collecting on your customers really relevant for whatever they're doing, for the task at hand? If you're applying for a job, okay, this is going to get real fun because human resources actually come into GDPR as well. If you're applying for a job as a security analyst, is asking someone what their religion is relevant to that job? More than likely not. But you ask the data, you ask for that information anyway. Asking for information that's not relevant can get you in trouble with GDPR as well. It's not whether you have the data at all and you could have the data, you could be secure, it could be encrypted. It's also whether the information was relevant for whatever you were doing as well. And conclusion, when in doubt, delete. So I'm big on risk. I'm big on risk mitigation. When in doubt, delete all data humanly possible. First thing, in my personal opinion, everybody needs to do who may interact with their customers is to look at every single process, procedure, form, every single thing you do. Scrub the entire thing to make sure that it is relevant and necessary for whatever you're doing at that particular time. Give people the ability to opt out of adding information. As a lawyer, I tell you all the time, if you see a clause in the contract that you don't like, strike through it, put your initials next to it. They can't force it on you later. You don't have to always sign for every single thing that comes in agreement. Most people won't tell you that. I'm saying as a lawyer, you don't have to agree to every single thing in the contract. You can literally strike through all the different parts of it and hand it over to the person and make them sign it as well. Probably gonna get kind of fun, but sure. I would also tell you, seek a lawyer if need be. One who has some idea of how privacy laws are, how technology laws work, and how cybersecurity laws work. Find a lawyer to actually answer these questions for you as you get to them. Taking it on yourself is not advisable in my opinion, because as we found out from the guy with the camera outside his building, you may not think that because you're not collecting someone's email address to buy a phone charger, therefore you're not falling under GDPR. But as the camera example shows you, something as simple as having a camera outside your building can cause you a fine. The only reason why he got fined 4 million euros because he didn't make enough money. Otherwise, they would take him more money. They went with the percentage method instead. I think they said he made like around 40,000 euros a year, so he did the percentage of his income. And any questions? Yes. How fast did I go through this thing? Oh, I went through about 30 minutes. Okay.
But by the way, that was great. That was really interesting.
Yeah, I prefer to kind of just drill in and rather than going through all the historical part. Trust me, I can talk for hours if I need to.
That was extremely interesting. I got to say, about the zip code and email address, Switzerland is another snafu, right? Because they ask, situation all fucked up. Like, they ask this all the time. Like, you go buy some stuff at the store. What's your email address? And also you go to the doctor, like, what's your profession? What do you do?
Right.
Yeah, what do we need to know that, right?
And that would be my opinion. So it's no one's gotten fined with that aspect of it yet. Because so when I was in law school, I had to learn, when you phrase that, they recommended us when I was in law school to learn how to argue both sides of the story. If you're a one-sided lawyer, if you're either a plaintiff lawyer or a defendant's lawyer, you're going to lose your cases. So I'm going to argue both sides so it's out for you. I'm defended, so therefore that means I'm representing the company, the store. I have the person's email address. I have their telephone, their zip code as well. Zip code, historical data. We need to know whether the store that's in that area is relevant to the people that are serving. What merchandise are they buying in this particular area? Therefore, we can actually bring in more merchandise. It's not giving any specific information about a person. Therefore, the zip code, why not? Prosecution side, well, you have this person's credit card number. You know their name as well. Now you're tied to a zip code.
Yeah, and the zip code, you use it at the gas station to prove your identity, right?
Well, the only reason why that gets away with because your card authorizes based upon your zip code for security reasons. Yeah. But when you're buying something at a store, they don't ask you for your zip code when you're buying something. That's not why they're asking for the information. They're effectively collecting some data on you. Email address, that's a whole other animal. Yeah. Let's see, let me defend the company on the email address. We asked for the email address so we can send them offers and coupons. We gave them the choice. We didn't tell them they had to do it. We didn't force them to give the email address. Basically, they imply an opt-out verbally.
Or you give random stuff. I mean, this is usually what I do. Yeah.
Actually, whenever I get to these things where they ask me for my email address, I literally put in there y@no.com. Lie to you not. That's exactly what I put in all those forms. y@no.com. Okay. And for name, Y, last name is no.
So my question is that we don't have any equivalent to GDPR at the federal level, but I know at state level there's many things that are moving. So can you comment on that?
For which states? Any states?
Yeah,
I know about the ones that happen in the U.S. So California is about to pass a law that's very similar to GDPR as well, where it gives citizens the ability to force a company to delete their data, verify with information. That California is passing a law very similar to that. Most of the laws in the United States are related to data breaches. So definitely can talk about data breaches. Most of all the laws focus on the notification time, whether there's a penalty going to be imposed, which is also done basically as administrative penalty in the long run. But as it pertains to whether a person has real privacy protection, that's not really what the states has been focusing on. Case in point, spam. If the U.S. cared about people's privacy, I would not get spam emails all day long. Especially, I was getting emails about home warranty before I even bought my house. It makes no sense. So the U.S. is concerned about specific areas of privacy for people, such as their health information. That's one area they really care a whole lot about. Personally identified information. So, okay, how can I give you an example of this? My name, this is actually 100% true, by the way. Whenever I meet someone and I don't know if you're safe, you might be a bad person. I tell them, Google me. And they don't believe me. So the more questions someone asks about me, the more information they can find out about me in real life. Why? I am a lawyer licensed in the state of Alabama, which means that I'm also a public servant at this point, which means that anything tied to my law practice is public information. And because when you first started practicing law, it requires you to actually put in your physical address to apply for the bar exam, my house address is actually published, is out there enough for it anyway. Whenever you file any information for a business to incorporate a business, you have to give a physical address. I can't use a P.O. box. So if you do enough searching, you can literally find my house. You would think that someone's residence would be considered private information. It's not. Why? Because you can go to, if you know the county the person lives in, you can go to that particular county in that particular state, put in their name, and it gives you all the information and details about their property. Now, for some random strange reason, your email address is considered to be private information still. That's considered to be PII. Your first name, last name, telephone number, physical address, someone can hunt you and like Michael Myers and kill you is perfectly fine. But your email address is not.
Wow.
That's the U.S. for you.
All right, cool. Thanks a lot.
So obviously there's a lot of inconsistency in regulation across different state and federal governments.
Correct.
And obviously the regulatory burden gets more and more with each differing set of regulations. Do you have any thoughts about better ways to implement things across the board, or what you would do if you had your own government?
So we won't go into the government part. We won't go into government. I try my best to have political conversations, not because I sit in city government, but because CNN is interesting enough, put it that way. So I won't go into all the political climate part of it, but I will say, if it was up to me from a business standpoint, and my advice as an attorney, my approach is always the risk-based model. I prefer to take the risk-based approach. If you find the most stringent regulation in the entire world, take that regulation, model what you do off of that, but also remember that all these laws and regulations are actually the bottom of what you should be doing. If you're constantly trying to just meet regulatory compliance, you're behind the curve already. You're effectively chasing a rabbit at that point. I won't go into my many discussions with managers and whatnot about that, but I tell them the goal is never to just meet a regulation. The goal is to go beyond the regulation. Have processes in place that go beyond. The caveat to that is if you have those processes in place and you're getting audited, any procedure you have in writing, now you're binded by that procedure as well. So we'll say that the federal regulation may say encrypt data at 64-bit. Well, you have a policy that says we're going to always encrypt data at 256-bit encryption with double ciphers, the whole 9 yards. Well, you say, you know what? That was a data leakage. We're going to now audit your systems to make sure everything was done correctly. It's okay. You have 64 sitting over here. You have 256 sitting over here. All of a sudden they find this one person who may be an issue. He is at 128. Well, you're not in compliance. Yes, I am. It's more than 64, but your paperwork says you're going to be in 256. You're not meeting your own goals at this point. Now you have a process issue. That's when you start getting to the point of being negligent. So I would say go for the strongest words you can find and try to go above and beyond that always.
Any other questions?
You were advising to keep the encryption keys from things in the cloud, but actually, when you do that, you lose most of the functionality of the cloud, like everything which is related to data, sorting, filtering, and so on. How do you cope with that?
You have a PKI server?
Well, still, if the functionality in the cloud allows to sort something and has only access to encrypted data, then you cannot sort, you cannot filter, you cannot search.
Well, before you access your data, keep in mind you have two different points. Okay, so I wish I had a drawing board. I would draw this out, make it so much simpler. I could, I guess, technically draw on my laptop. So you have more than one entry point to your data. You have to authenticate with the cloud service provider to actually get to your data in the first place, right? From that point on, have another lock. Issue PKI certificates so that when you get past that first one, now you're authenticating to your data itself. You get your functionality back. So it's not necessarily the functionality of getting through that first door. It's getting past the first door.
Right. If you provide the functionality, but if the cloud supplier provides the functionality, and typically on Office 365, for example, if all emails are encrypted, you can search into the emails because the functionality of the search itself is implemented cloud side and works on the data they have, which is encrypted data. They don't go through your decryption with your keys to sort their data.
Okay. You know what two-factor authentication is, right?
Yeah.
What I describe is no different than two-factor authentication. Having two keys to get to the same set of data. You're just making sure the cloud provider doesn't have the second key. There's literally no difference between that and two-factor authentication. To get into my house, I use two-factor authentication. Sure, I have digital locks in my house. I use two-factor authentication to get into my house. Oh, I forgot I do that for the power company too. I do two-factor authentication. Make sure we use RSA in our particular case. So it's no different than what I'm describing. It's no different than two-factor authentication. You still have two keys to get the same set of data.
Okay.
Any other question?
Thanks for your talk. I have a question about if I'm writing my own website and I'm including Google Analytics, what should I look out for?
Processing of people's information?
Yeah, just I'm using it to find out what the people are looking at on my website, on my personal website.
Okay, so you're talking about the website statistics. That's not going to reveal any information about a particular person in general. It's going to tell you how many hits you get.
Yeah, but the IP address?
IP addresses, okay. IP addresses can be used to identify any individual person. Part of the data that comes along with it. Oh, and by the way, if I don't answer a question, I'll just tell somebody I don't know the answer. So I'm going to give you the best answer I can give you for this. Even though IP addresses can be used to identify a person, it's going to take in most cases, multiple steps to identify a person. The IP address to my house won't get you to my name. You have to go to the ISP and then ask the ISP for who they issued the IP address to and then get to me. So that's a little bit different. It's not the same as someone's social security number. Well, they can get right to you in 2 seconds. Now, if you know what you're doing and there's enough data leaks, then of course, yeah, you can find out who a person is using IP addresses, but not that simple. My question would really be, why would you collect IP addresses versus collecting where area of the country someone's coming from? That'll be my question as a lawyer.
Because it's automatically included in Google Analytics.
All right, so we won't talk about Google and their lack of actually making sure things are compliant, because we talked about that earlier. But you're not collecting the data at that point. You're not controlling. Ooh, this is gonna get fun. So you're not necessarily controlling the data you're getting. They're passing data on to you at that point. Now, what you do with said data becomes the issue of who's going to be liable if there was a problem. That's what the fun part will be. Your website is not exactly trying to collect any information about a European citizen. IP addresses can be put into that category, but it still, in my opinion, would be counted as a gray area, one of those gray areas when it comes to GDPR, because even though you can't identify somebody by an IP address, it's not inherently what it's there for. Now, without going through some extra hoops and hurdles.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. More questions? Yes.
Kind of same question. If I have a website where I store data, but I'm not, I don't know what kind of data, should I be compliant with GDPR? Because I don't know what kind of data the user will store. Maybe it's addresses, but maybe it's only I don't know, Word document with their presentation.
So my advice, considering how, and I would give this advice even as a lawyer in another country, my legal advice will be, considering how stringent GDPR can be, my advice would be to do anything humanly possible to comply with it. To his point earlier about finding a regulation. When it comes to privacy, model your privacy based upon that. You have no idea what data you're collecting. Honestly, that's not necessarily a good thing. You need to know what all data you're collecting, because otherwise you may be collecting a bunch of stuff in your servers that you really don't need. We're not even talking about dealing with someone's privacy issue at that point. We're talking about the amount of storage you're taking in at that point. You really need to know what you have. Same concept in the U.S. if you receive stolen goods. You can say, well, I didn't know it was stolen. It doesn't matter. You have possession of it. And they have a saying in the military, a saying in the U.S. that possession is 9/10 of the law. You have the data, you really need to know what you have up front. More questions? Hey, my pen test guy.
Thank you. Would you say that the GDPR is effective to protect privacy of European citizens?
Effectively, yes. It's not there to help a business whatsoever. Hence the reason why they have the fine set up the way it is. The fines were set up in such a way to bankrupt companies if they want to. It's set up in a way to make a point, to make a statement. That's honestly what it was set up to do. And, oh, by the way, there's one interesting part to the fines. It's not just the 10, 20, then the 2 to 4% everybody keeps talking about. There's also this wonderful thing in the U.S. we call class action lawsuits. Forgot to mention this earlier. This is very important. Class action lawsuits is effectively when you have multiple citizens, then they turn over their rights over to the government, whomever government may be at the particular case. They can then fine you an unlimited amount of money. Ergo, Google and their 50 million. If you have multiple citizens turn over their rights, you have unlimited fine potential. They can literally bankrupt a company if they want to. As a matter of fact, when I was in Tampa, there was a company that was operating in Germany, and I forgot the other location, somewhere in the U.S. And their app that they had so many difficulties and issues dealing with GDPR that they effectively ended up getting shut down. They had to shut down their operations in Germany altogether and just kept everything in the U.S. and then redid the entire thing. It's effectively designed to go after companies. So it's 100% there to protect the citizens. More questions?
More questions.
We have time. Yes, we still have time if you all want it. Well, I'm between you and coffee as well, so I understand.
So then thank you for this informative talk.
Thank you.